In the beginning, building bigger biceps is easy. Perform barbell rows and weighted chin-ups and focus on progression. When that no longer works, add a bit of direct biceps work and voila, your biceps are growing again. As you get more experienced, however, the rate at which you can progress on those barbell rows slows down, and adding even 5 pounds to your bicep curls becomes impossible unless you want to sacrifice volume. If you're struggling to add another 5 to 10 pounds to your big heavy pulling movements and you can't curl any more weight without doing less overall work, you can forget about building mountainous bicep peaks. If that sounds like you, you're in luck. In this video, I want to share 3 very simple but effective methods for taking your arms to the next level without having to waste time with full arm days or perform any specialization training. I don't care how long you've been lifting or how many different techniques you've tried. If you implement any of these strategies to your training, or all of them, your arms will grow again, period. Tip number 1, increase frequency. When we talk about training frequency in the context of this video, we're referring to the number of times we're training a muscle group per week. Here's what we know. When we equate for volume, training 3 days per week produces greater muscle growth than training once per week. A study published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research compared 1 day to 3 days of resistance training per week with training volume held constant. The first group trained 1 time per week and performed 3 sets to failure. Group number 2 trained 3 times per week but performed only 1 set to failure per session. Their 1 rep maxes were assessed at baseline and then again at weeks 6 and 12. What they found was that although both groups made significant improvements in strength, the higher frequency group achieved greater increases in lean body mass. In other words, training a muscle 3 times per week produced greater muscle gains than training it 1 time per week when volume was equal. And I'd be willing to bet that these results were due to 2 primary mechanisms. The first one being the repeated bout effect, the adaptation whereby a single bout of eccentric exercise protects against muscle damage from subsequent eccentric bouts. It's been shown that when training a muscle group more frequently, to a degree, we increase our ability to recover and adapt. That said, the notion that training a muscle group more than once per week would impede recovery is, to put it blatantly, hogwash. To the contrary, training your biceps 2 to 3 times per week would actually increase your ability to recover between bouts. The more we can train specific muscle groups in a week while being able to recover from the stress, the more time we will spend synthesizing protein for that particular muscle. Which brings me to mechanism number 2, muscle protein synthesis. Studies suggest that muscle protein synthesis is more than doubled at about 24 hours following a workout. By the 36-hour mark, however, it has dropped back down to baseline. It's not hard to see that, despite volume being equal, the person spending more time in this anabolic state will produce greater muscle growth. Now, before you decide to start hitting your biceps 7 times per week, consider this. A recent meta-analysis concluded that frequencies of training twice per week promoted more muscle growth than once per week, on a volume-equated basis, that is. However, they also added whether training a muscle group 3 times per week is superior to a twice per week protocol remains to be determined. The meta-analysis, however, only accounted for higher frequency with volume being equal. That said, training at a higher frequency can be a great way to accumulate volume once you've reached a certain threshold in your training. The evidence is clear that even if total volume is equal, the individual who trains a muscle group twice per week would have achieved greater muscle gains than the individual who only trained that muscle once. What we don't know is whether or not distributing that same volume between 3 days instead of 2 would have any additional benefit in terms of muscle hypertrophy. What we do know, however, is that if we added an additional biceps training day and increased the total volume that way, we'd elicit greater muscle growth. Tip number 2, cheat. It's no secret that progressive overload is the primary pathway by which we build new muscle. We also know that with single joint movements, for example bicep curls, it's not as simple as adding more weight to the bar. So we need to handle more load, but we're at a point where we just can't add any more weight to the bar. What do? Simple, we cheat. Say for example you're able to curl 70 pounds for 8 reps maximum. No matter how frequently you train your biceps, you just can't get past that 8th rep. I'd recommend squeezing another 2 to 4 reps out by using a bit of body English. Not only is using momentum going to increase the workload by aiding with additional reps, but despite how little work the target muscle is doing on the concentric, it's still doing all of the work on the negative. This isn't to say we should swing the weight up using momentum or bend over backwards to complete a rep, but rather putting your back into it in a subtle fashion with just enough body English to consider it a bit of a cheat. More work equates to more growth, and because a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, you'll be able to move up to that 75-pound barbell without sacrificing volume much faster. Tip number 3, undulate rep ranges. There are 3 primary mechanisms that drive muscle growth: mechanical tension, muscle damage, and to a lesser degree, metabolic stress. There are 2 main variables that determine which of these responses we elicit. For one, the amount of load we use, and second, how long the muscle is placed under tension. Mechanical tension is, as the name implies, a mechanically induced tension produced both by force generation and stretch. This stress is typically formed when lifting a heavier load for a sufficient amount of time. Mechanical stress has been shown to produce the greatest increases in strength and is a primary driver of muscle growth. Muscle damage is a localized damage to muscle tissue which generates a hypertrophic response. The tension necessary to produce this result is typically found in a moderate rep range, where the load is still relatively heavy, but due to the higher number of reps, the muscle is placed under tension for a prolonged period of time. Metabolic stress has to do with a metabolite buildup that is a byproduct of training with a lighter load using higher repetitions. When you're curling those 20-pound dumbbells to the point your biceps feel like they've caught fire, that's metabolic stress. The chart you're looking at depicts the relationship between volume and intensity and the stress it produces. It's important to understand that these stresses aren't confined to specific rep ranges or intensities. Instead, it's a continuum. For example, an individual who is using a relatively heavy weight and performing 7 repetitions is producing a good deal of mechanical tension and a great deal of muscle damage. On the other hand, the person using a lighter weight and lifting it for 15 reps may not get any mechanical tension, but the intensity is still sufficient enough to cause some muscle damage while eliciting metabolic stress. Now that we see what each rep range can provide, let's talk a little bit about how they can work together to aid in hypertrophy. Increases in the lactate threshold caused by metabolic stress will allow the trainee to work with a heavier weight for a longer period of time. Increases in strength will spill over by allowing the trainee to work with a heavier load when training for higher reps. Creating muscle damage will induce adaptive responses that will aid in both mechanical stress training and metabolic stress training. It's not hard to see, if you undulate these rep ranges effectively, your training becomes a virtuous cycle of growth. Want to break through a plateau and force newfound growth into your biceps? It's as simple as training them 3 times per week, with each day dedicated to a specific stress, for example a light, medium, and heavy day, and focusing on progression. Having a hard time adding any more weight to the barbell or lifting heavier dumbbells? Cheat your way big by using a bit of body English to get past that threshold. Did you find this video helpful? If so, click the like button below. And if you're looking for a full arm training program to speed up growth in your biceps and triceps, then download my Arm Growth Accelerator completely free. Head over to the link in the description, enter your name and your email, and you'll get instant access to the program. If you want to see more videos like this one, please be sure to subscribe, and I'll talk to you in the next one.